back end of this. And so it was like, I was just like, why are all these buttons here? And why is this whole thing changed? All I want to do is schedule this, get it in like a spot where it's not live and where I can invite someone. That's all I want. And it kept going live. And I'm like, dang, there's like, hopefully, or luckily I don't have like a ton of subscribers right now. So it's not like I'm consistently going live to like people and they're just seeing screenshots of me doing weird stuff. But
yeah, they've changed. Hangouts isn't even going to exist soon.
Really?
It's going to be Meet or something like that.
Interesting.
It doesn't, I don't know. I'm so done with Google.
I know, no kidding. Well, crap. See, that's why I'm bummed out, because the way of doing this, at least for me, in this podcast format, is so simple because I don't have to have like a mixer or anything recording or video software or anything. It's just like right here, I can download it, rip the audio, good to go.
Yep.
But I'm screwed.
Man, oh man.
But awesome. Great to have you on again. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks.
I would ask you what's been up, but you've clearly been buckling down writing a book.
Pretty much. That's the that's been one of the main things. I mean, it's been a few years endeavor to do it, but yeah, it's definitely a full-time job at the moment.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And that's why I wanted to jump on this as quickly as I could when you had mentioned that you only had like one kind of day open, because I was like, crap, I really want to get this in. And I don't want to have to wait another month to do it, because it felt so relevant to exactly what I'm trying to do right now. And it felt the exact same way reading through the whole thing. So
cool. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, my time. I hate being busy, but sometimes you have to be busy, or just by virtue of what you're doing, busyness ensues.
Yeah, no kidding. So, and I'm sure with this too, it's probably only going to be more of that for the time being.
Yeah. I mean, the book isn't even out yet as of recording this. So it will be busy then as well, but that's less than a month now. So
cool. So yeah, I kind of want to back into like how you ended up getting into feeling like you needed to write this and how you ended up putting together, because for me, it was really awesome when I was going through it. I kind of was taking notes and coming up with questions, but then as I was writing those down, you were literally just ticking off the questions as I got further along in the book. And I was like, well, shit, now I have nothing to talk to him about, because he just went one by one through the whole thing. But it's cool because I also went back through the other podcast that we did and realized how much that really set up what you did with this book, and also kind of where I'm at with what I'm trying to do. And that's why I was really excited to have you on again to talk about how you put this together and kind of the transition of the whole thing. So can you back up to like, in the previous episode, we'd kind of gotten into like your background and how you got into a lot of this, which you go through at the beginning and end of the book. But then how did that progress to feeling like you actually needed to write this and put it all together?
Yeah, I mean, I should have listened to that episode again before, but I guess I was kind of like, always feel like the book is not new. Like for my mailing list subscribers, the idea has been there for years. And even in the way that I run my business, the idea has been there for like decades. And it was just a matter of me being like, well, I feel like a weirdo the way I run my business, the way I don't want to grow, the way I see success and all of that. And I was like, whatever, I'm just going to write about it. Like just write an article, just like write a blog post or an article or whatever you want to call it for my mailing list about why I don't want to grow my business. And I shared it, and I was just like inundated with people being like, oh, I actually feel the same way about like how I run my business, or like what I want out of life and work and all of that. And I was like, well, shit, there's like, there's other people that feel that seem like they're in the same boat as me, and it seems like this is something worth talking about. And then I was like, well, okay, this seems like a great idea for a book. So I'd already self-published a bunch, which I think we talked about last time, self-publishing a bit. And I was like, well, what if I try traditional publishing? Because I've like had harsh words about traditional publishing in the past, but I'm like, I shouldn't really have harsh words about things I don't know much about. Like, I'd rather experience things so I have the right to complain about them, which is the worst reason for doing things, but still it's a good reason, at least for me. And so I was like, well, why don't I just see what would happen if I tried to go that route? And so I looked for an agent. I found one that wanted to work with me, and then she found a publisher that wanted to work with me, and then it all just kind of, yeah, snowballed from there.
In a great way.
Yeah, exactly.
So, like, based on taking the kind of information that you had started getting from your subscriber list and how you ran your business, what propelled that into making you feel like you actually wanted to put it all together in book form and kind of talk about it more versus just, like sitting on it and just feeling like, okay, I'm doing something right here.
Yeah, I mean, I really wanted this to be a book because I wanted to show people that there's not a right way to do business. So there's not like, here's what business success looks like, or here's what a business person looks like, or here's what you do if you're successful in business. It's like all of that is just, especially in like the news or the media or like the entrepreneurialism space, it's all just, I can't even say the word. Like I shouldn't even be an entrepreneur. But like it just seems like there's one way that's being talked about, and it's being talked about as if it's the only way. And I'm like, "Well, that sucks." Like, that's just silly that that's the case because it's not the case. And I also feel like it would just be such a shame if somebody was like, "Oh, I think I want to," or "I have an idea for a business," or "I think I wanna do something," but, like, the way that I see business working is not the way I feel like I wanna do business, so maybe I'll just, like, hard pass on the whole thing. And that to me seems like a shame because, like, if people like you and I can run businesses and, like, got lots of tattoos and don't shave very often and just, like, enjoy life as much as we enjoy work, like, if we can make things work, then I think other people can figure out ways to do things on their terms. Because like, that's what business is to me, is, like, figuring out how to solve problems on your own terms. Otherwise, I'd work for a company and just be a designer because that would be easier. Like, then
Hmm.
all I would have to do is design. I wouldn't have to do, like, writing and products and sales and email automations. I'd just be drawing stuff all day.
Hmm.
So, because I take the harder route of, like, working for myself, I should be able to call the shots. And that's kind of what I wanted the book to be, is like, it's so funny because like every other business book is like, this is the blueprint, this is the way you do the thing. And my book is like more philosophical and more like, there is no way to do it, but here's some things, here's some questions you can ask yourselves, or here's some ideas to take into consideration to come to your own conclusions and decisions, which I ultimately think is a better way to do things, but it's also a harder sell. It's not like
Hmm.
read the book and you will get the answers, because there are no answers. Sorry.
Yeah. So if you were to kind of put together a little like elevator pitch of how you would describe what the book is, what would that be? And then I guess my follow-up question to that would be, in you talk about that being the way that you wanted to do business, or maybe not necessarily the way that you wanted to do it, but knowing that the other way was not the right way. What was that process like for you of kind of finding your own path, and how often did you kind of question yourself in what you were doing? And, what was that process like of kind of like, pushing yourself down toward where you are now and what this book is?
Yeah. And I mean, the book, I guess, the best way to describe it is that the thesis of the book is that success in business doesn't lead to growth, it leads to freedom. The freedom of the ability to choose whether or not you want to grow or whether or not you want something else entirely. And the book really looks at the idea that we can basically determine what success is for each of us. And I mean, the whole book is full of stories of people and of businesses who are profitable, of course, because it's still business. Like, you still need to make money, but like figuring out like what enough money is, or what enough customers is, or what how much you want to work so you can enjoy the rest of your life. And it's not even really like an anti-growth book. It's just a, growth makes sense until it doesn't. So how about we figure out where that point is? And that's the book. And it's not, as well, I will note that the title isn't meant to be literal. It's not like I don't have a one person business. There's like 5 people that I work with. It's more meant to be like Tim Ferriss's 4-hour work week isn't just you work 4 hours and you peace out and you're done. It's like a mindset. And so I think Company of One is like the mindset of questioning growth and determining what success is for yourself, and then working towards alignment with that and with that purpose. It'd be a long elevator ride to get all that out, but
Yeah. But you kind of need it because it's like you were saying, it's not the one size fits all thing. It's kind of,
yeah.
choose your own ride. And at any given point, there's so many things changing around you that you have to make decisions constantly. And that's not always going to be the same.
Yeah.
Let's do this thing to get to this level to make more money every single time. That's not necessarily the way to go.
No, exactly. Like, I mean, if you look, it's so funny because, like, in business, growth for most companies is like the thing, like, that's the metric to measure success. But, like, in any other aspect, unfettered, like, rapid growth is, like, actually really bad. Like, it's cancer. It's literally cancer in another scenario, and it's like like, there's no infinite resources for anything. Like, even if we look at the planet, like, there's no infinite resources to just take more and more and more. Like, we run out of stuff, and we are running out of stuff, and it's just like when we don't consider that growth isn't always the best thing, we get to bad places, and even bad places in terms of profit. Like, all the studies that I list in the book show that business growth is actually detrimental, or like the downfall of most businesses if they try to grow too quickly or without thinking about it. And so I just think that that's a conversation that more people need to be having in the world and in business for sure.
Completely agree.
What
And
was
that
part
was
two? There was part two of the question.
part two was what was the process like of stumbling into walls as you figured out how you wanted to run your business as it led up to you talking about that process through this book.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always kind of run my business in that way, mostly because I knew that I didn't want to be a manager because I don't like managing people and I suck at managing people. And I also like I like my job. Like, when I was a designer, I really loved design. I really loved working with clients. I really loved the collaboration. So I didn't want to, but I was always booked solid. I always had tons of like I was always booking my schedule in advance. And people would be like, "Well, you're popular. Like, you're doing like you keep raising your rates. You're popular. Like, why don't you hire people? Like, why don't you grow it into like an agency?" And I was always like, "Well, I don't wanna promote myself out of the job I like, because
Hmm.
that doesn't make sense. I would rather figure out ways to, like, make more money or even make the same amount of money and have more time off or that sort of thing." And so it never really made sense to me, but it wasn't really, like, a conscious thing for the first little while. It was just like, I just don't like doing that. So I'm just not gonna grow. And then after a while, I started to kinda think like, well, this kinda does make sense as like a business philosophy. And I mean, it can like literally the book came out of how most business books start, I think. And it was while I was out surfing with a buddy of mine. That's how all business books are like ideas come, I think, but not really. But I was out with a buddy
I
of mine.
wish.
Yeah, exactly. I was out with a buddy of mine surfing, and he's a freelance accountant, and we were sitting in the lineup waiting for waves, and it was like September, October, and he's like, "Hey, buddy, I've made just about enough for the year, so I'm gonna go rock climbing for the rest of the year." And he takes off on a wave. I'm just sitting there, like bobbing up and down, like, "What did you just say to me? I don't understand." And then he paddles back around, and we start chatting about it. And he was like, "Yeah, like I know how much I need to make in my business to cover like my rent and food and my vehicle and how much I need to put away." And he's like, "If I wanted to make more money, I would have to do more work. I'd have to spend more hours working. I'd have more stress, more responsibilities. Like, it's diminishing returns, bro. Like, why do I want to do that when I know what I need that makes my life as good as it can be from the work that I'm doing?" And I was like, I do that, but I hadn't thought about it. But like I hadn't like it didn't click in my mind as like a conscious thing until that. And then as I started paying attention to that, I started to see more and more like research about it. Like it's like when you buy a red car and all you see are red cars, like all the
Hmm.
news I was reading, all of the people I was
Confirmation
talking.
bias.
Yeah, like I just kept seeing examples of this idea that questioning growth is a good thing over and over again. I'm just like just furiously making notes all the time of like this could be in a chapter, this could be in a chapter. And yeah, it just kind of grew from there.
Awesome. So then how did you end up being able to kind of like put the pieces together. Because what I thought was really great about Company of One was, and I say this to my girlfriend all the time, is like, I'll pick up 4 or 5 books at a time because I'll get this hankering to read. But then I get into one and I'm like, that's not the one, that's not the one. And I kind of go through until I get one and then I just devour it.
Yeah.
And yours was one of those where I sat down and just went through the whole thing in one sitting. It was like, this is it. Because there's not a ton of filler, and it very much keeps you going through and kind of like answering objections that you might have to kind of the framework. So how did you go about backing into like pieces of it and how it was structured?
Yeah, I mean, Socrates. Like, I think his big thing was like, if he's in an argument with somebody, he wants to present the other side's opinion to them and then dismantle it in front of them. And when you do that, you basically make a very strong case. I'm like, that seems pretty like Socrates, I'm sure, was a smart bro. So like, I don't know, that seems good enough for me. But as well, I think that, and I mean, I know what you're saying. Like, I've read so many business books and so many nonfiction books where it was like the first chapter is so good, and then I'm like, okay, I get it. Like the next
Mhm.
chapter is kind of just filler or fluff, and then the next, and I'm like, this is a blog post. Like, I
Yeah.
don't understand that. I
Yep.
mean, a lot of writers,
I'm sure that that's what a lot of those are, and that's how I feel too, where it's like
yeah.
you came up with this idea and you realized you could probably make some money off of it. So then you went to your publisher and went, how many extra pages do I need to add to this to make it a thing?
Yeah, and that, like, I didn't want to be in that case because, like, I don't like books like that, and that's why I read more sci-fi than nonfiction. But I was like, okay, if this is going to be a book, I need to kind of map out, like, if the overarching thesis is that growth makes sense until it doesn't, and we need to determine it enough, then what are all of the areas that I could focus on, like one by one, to build the bigger picture where I'm not really repeating myself. I'm more diving into, if this is the thesis, how do we apply it to customers? If this is the thesis, how do we apply it to trust? How do we apply it to systems and automations? And it was like when I finished that, I was like, there's a lot here. Like there's a lot here. And even when I wrote, like I probably cut, because I think the final draft is about 70,000 words, which is pretty short for a book. But I was like, it needs to be as long as it needs to be. Like, I'm not
Mhm.
gonna fucking pad it. I'm not gonna make it longer than it needs to be. It's as long as it has to be. But the first draft as well, I think, was probably like 90 to 100,000 words. And like I was ruthless, and my editor, luckily, who's really good, was ruthless about like, I've said this again, reference it. And that's why throughout the book, there's always like in brackets, like see chapter 2. So I'm not going
Mhm.
to repeat chapter 2. I'm just going to say, like, remember I talked about this? Here's 2 words, chapter 2.
Yep.
Now you remember that. Now we can move forward. Now I don't have to like fill it up with more pages and more content, because that bugs me so much, man. Like when I'm
Mhm.
reading a book, I'm like, you repeated this like 8 times. Like, I get it. I understand this should have been a blog post. Cool for you for making money off of it, but like I'm a reader and I'm bored. And I
Yep.
don't want that. Like I have no attention span. So I want to write books and content that are the length that they have to be, not the length that they're supposed to be.
I completely agree. And that's one thing that I greatly appreciated out of that. And you could tell that you did it as you were going through it. And like I mentioned, I was writing questions down and I just kept like erasing them as I got through it because I was like, damn it. And I just answered exactly what I had on there. But yeah, I think, and to your point too, it's cool because you go through a lot of other people's stories and kind of set up um, different what's the word I'm looking for? Just different situations in which the same company of one mindset can apply to different things. And what's cool is I think a lot of people tend to get very focused in like I'm a SAS person, or like I'm only product, and like so you don't get the full story when you're like, man, I resonate with what you're saying, but I really don't have any sort of context to understand how that might
Yeah.
apply to me. And for what you had written here, it was amazing because it was like you were taking people through the gamut of different things. How did you end up going about that? Did you have connections with those people prior, or did you have to dig to kind of get those from people? How did you end up putting those specific instances together?
Yeah, I mean, and it was it was mostly my agent who was like, "This is more universally applicable." Like, really, the book is a philosophy book masquerading as a business book. Like, that's honestly kind of what it is. But I was like, this does apply to like the corporate world, or this does apply to like a mindset even outside of business. And for all the stories, to your point about that, it was probably 50% people I knew, and then 50% people that I reached out to through other people in my network, which is basically how I operate anyways. I exist only in my network, and then maybe 1 degree outside my network, even with like press and promotion. It's all like either who I know or who I know that knows somebody else, because like I suck at cold calling or suck at cold emailing. And so it was, yeah, it was mostly. Actually, no, I don't. I write a bunch in the chapter about leadership, and I talked a lot to Rand Fishkin, and I didn't know him going in, but I had watched. It was a CNN report, probably some of the best reporting I've ever seen about entrepreneurialism and depression. And the interviewer interviewed a whole bunch of people. Rand was one of them, and I was just like, this is like, one, this story is making me cry, and two, this is like really, really interesting, and like, why is nobody talking about leadership in this way? And I basically just reached out to him, and he was still he was still at Moz at the time, and I was just like, hey, can I interview you for the book? And he was like, sure. And then I talked to him, but everybody else I knew either through my mailing list or through people, because I think I told my mailing list that I was writing the book and this is what it was about. And I might have asked, like, if anybody wants to share their story about this, or know somebody wants to share a story about this, then like hit reply. And so I probably got most of the contacts through that. And it's really just like trying to figure out, like, for each chapter, which is like a different topic, is like, okay, whose story? Because I did all the interviews in the beginning, and I just tried to cover like as much of the interesting part of everybody's story as possible. And then I just, like, as I was going through chapters, I was like, okay, this is what I need to talk about. Whose story fits the best? And if I didn't have something, then I would go out and look for somebody. But I think most of them I had initially, and then I just kind of slotted them in where they made the most sense, as far as telling the story from start to finish.
That's awesome. So, and it was interesting that you had mentioned too there, like the connection between depression and like this business side of things, because one of the notes that I had actually written down when I was reading this was how much does this apply to a lot of these bigger issues that we're seeing throughout society right now, which is like not really being able to pull ourselves away from technology and not having good relationships and like not being able to pass down a good understanding of how to deal with these things to our children, and then what kind of world do they grow up in because of that. And I think there are a lot of things that stem from the business world that people don't necessarily think are connected. And I think what you were just talking about there is huge, and one of the reasons why I was so excited to get into your book and kind of see how that was connecting to what I was kind of starting to tap into and how this is all playing out was that, it seems like just talking about another way of doing things needs to be talked about more. And it's just that message isn't loud enough in the chatter of all the other shit going on right now.
Yeah, and I mean, even that, like, that chapter specifically, there's a chapter on leadership, but it's a chapter on like different types of leaders, because I think there's so many examples of like the Hollywood like manager or tech startup leader where they're like always white dudes, always super A-type personalities, always super egocentric. And those kind of people make for good movies, but they make for crappy leaders. And there's so many ways, like there's a whole bunch on like being introverted and how introverts can be awesome leaders. And I mean, I think I'm trying to remember from the book, but I think something like 85% of managers or C-level people are extroverts. But all of the research shows that introverts make amazing leaders. And there's this disconnect of like, this is what the data shows is really good, but this is what actually exists. And there's like studies upon studies that show how diversity just helps the bottom line, helps make it easier to do work, helps make it easier to come to absolute truths by butting up opinions with each other. And it's just like, and even talking about like I think one of the chapters is debugging the myth of infallible leadership, about how leaders are seen as like they have to have all the answers, they have to be super confident, they have to like never show weakness, and like that doesn't work. And like that's why we get people who are depressed, or why like half of entrepreneurs have suffered through some kind of mental issues in the past. And it's like we need to like figure this shit out. Like we need to deal with this stuff. We need to come to better conclusions with the research that we're doing, and be more okay with discussing it and dealing with it, because ultimately like it's like in an airplane, like if you're flying with a toddler, like if shit goes down, you put your mask on first and then the mask
Mhm.
on the other person. Like you can't be a good business owner unless you're taking care of yourself. And when we have examples of people like fucking Elon Musk who say that you have to work 80 hours a week or
I
you're not going
saw
to make
that.
it. Yeah, and you have to sleep on he has a couch in his office, and he's afraid to take vacations because the last two times he took vacations, rockets exploded, and somebody hasn't explained to him the difference between correlation and causation. Like when these are the examples that we have in the world, like bad things are going to happen because like it's
Mhm.
not sustainable and it's not healthy.
Well, it was such a bummer to like, specifically with that Elon thing too, was like, man, I thought this guy was just beyond that sort of thing. Like I understood that he, pushed himself to the brink, but I don't know. I thought that was just a very like, I don't know, for lack of a better word, like juvenile move to like put that out in the press, where you're like, in order to do anything decent, you have to like kill yourself to do it. It was like, fuck, man, what kind of message does that send to other people that want to do some good in the world? It's like,
Yeah.
kill yourself or don't do it. Like that's
Yeah.
terrible.
That's why we have the problems that we have, because people are seeing that, oh, if this is like if Elon Musk is super popular and he has rockets and tunnels and shit, then like that's what I have to do. And it's not. And I mean, I'm glad that there's people that are sharing the other side, like the Basecamp dudes or Buffer or other companies who are saying like, look, we can run calm companies that work
Hmm.
30, 40 hours. There's research from Pew that shows that productivity falls off a cliff after 50 hours. I mean, Elon hasn't read that study, I guess, because there's a difference between like working a lot and being smart with your work. Like it just doesn't make sense that those are the examples that new entrepreneurs or people in business are kind of seeing, when they should be that's just the like that's the stuff that gets clicks and views, right? And like the other stuff may be a bit boring, but like I don't know, having a boring business or a calm business is way more sustainable.
Yeah, that brings me to another couple of things that I was thinking about too, which was one, I had seen some sort of statistic where it was something um, uh, like business owners within the millennial demographic is at the lowest it's ever been in 25 years, and how much of a bummer that is. Because I'm someone that's in that demographic, and I see all this kind of like struggle porn online of like, you know, hustle this, do this, blah, 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 and how popular that shit is. But then to see that stat and be like, okay, where's the disconnect here of these people that want to pretend or feel like they're, working themselves to death, but then in reality, they're not even taking the first step toward trying to make that a reality.
Yeah, it's hard because it seems like like the struggle is required, when it's like a struggle or a failure can definitely help teach you things and make you more resilient. But like I like, is your business like if you have to work 80 hours a week and bust your butts to do it, like is it really successful? Like I would rather find ways to do things that are sustainable. And I mean like I come from like my background is that I've worked for myself for 20 years. So it's like if I was doing that for 20 years, I'd probably be dead by now. Like it doesn't make sense. And I think people, because we live in such an instant gratification world, people think that we need to do all of this to get to a certain place, when it's like if you take the long-term view and you move away from the like FOMO into like slow-mo or something, then that it just
Copyright it.
there you go, that'll be the next book. I just think that that makes a lot more sense, and it's all a comparison, man. Like, I think that's really what it comes down to, and, like, comparison and envy are such an innately human and understandable trait that it makes sense that we have that for other people, but it also, like, messes us up. Like, especially when we're comparing our insides to other people's outsides and like their highlight reel. And like we're comparing all of the crap that we have internally with like just the best things that people want to share about themselves. And there's an interview I was watching on Twitter. I can't remember the guy's name. He was the guy in Prison Break, the main character. I can't remember what his name is, but he was doing like a sit down interview with some students at a school. And he was talking about like self talk. And he was saying, like, if I talk to my friends the way I talk to myself, I'd have no friends.
Mhm.
And like that hit me like a ton of bricks. Like the way that we talk to ourselves and like compare ourselves to others is one ridiculous because it's an illogical comparison, but two is it's actually really detrimental. And but like it's understandable that we have this envy and we have this like this idea that like, oh, we need to kind of keep up with the digital Joneses or keep up with the business Joneses, and it's tough.
Mhm. So where do you think the kind of root of this other side of all these things going on has come from, in terms of like creating all this clickbait crap and like trying to just constantly push people down a sales funnel, like, and just like not really adding value, but just, I guess, one of my old creative directors called it oh, what did he called them tricks. It was like these tricks of,
Yeah.
how do I get you to subscribe when I haven't really done anything for you, and how do I try and get you to buy something even though you don't need it, type of thing. Like, where does that fundamentally come from, and why do you think it's like so pervasive these days?
Yeah, because I think in the short term, it's easier to do that. Like, I could probably sell more books if I said, "This is the book you need to read to be a success." Like, "Get this book, you'll succeed." It's harder to say, like, "There's no answers in this book, this product I'm selling, there's no answers, but it'll help you come to better conclusions." But I think that it's like a short-term versus long-term focus. It's like, it's easy to focus on rapid growth and basically churn and burn an audience where you're just hitting them over and over again, and they're either going to opt out or they're going to relent and purchase. But that's going to result in one purchase, and it's probably
Hmm.
going to result in a lot of refunds as well. And I mean, like, so one, my ego wouldn't be able to, like, I know some online creators who have like 20, 30% refund rates. And like my ego couldn't handle that. Like as a creative person, I couldn't handle a third of the people wanting me to give them their money back.
Well,
Like
even
that.
beyond your ego, your wallet. How does your wallet handle that?
Well, you need to have such high acquisition rates to handle that, and it's like that's so much work to do that. And I mean the flip side of that, and where I kind of always lean in with my business, and where I think a lot of people that I talk about in the book lean in, is more the like, if you're just honest, if you're just like, if you work at establishing trust, then one, you can build customers that last a lifetime, where I don't need to keep finding new customers for new products I build, because half of the people that buy one thing from me buy 2 or 3 or 5 things from me. Because if I focus on building relationships and building trust and making things that other people value enough that, like, I want people to be excited before they buy something, and that's cool, but more important is I want people to be happy once they've, like, clicked buy and they've got the thing. I don't want them to feel shitty after they bought something from me. I want them to feel just as excited, just as like, this is helpful, this is good, this is useful, this is valuable, this is what I need. And I think that is, I guess, maybe a harder way to do it because it's slower, but I think it nets more in the long run, but you just have to stick with it. And it's like it compounds because you don't have to, every time you launch something or you have like a recurring cost, you're not going to have to go out and look for new people plus 20% to cover churn. You can just, like, if I have a new product, I just tell my mailing list, like, "Hey friends, here's a new thing that I have. If you want it, you can buy it. If not, then catch on the next one." And like people buy, like, I don't really have to work. I suck at sales. Like, I don't have to work at sales because I'd rather work at trust. And what I think a lot of people fail to realize is that trust doesn't happen after you've made a product. Trust happens before you start making a product. And building a trustworthy product means that you're thinking about, like, how is this thing going to be valuable? How is this going to create a win? How is this something of substance? How is this something that could potentially last? And then if you do that, then you can build relationships. Like when I see a sale from like Stripe or PayPal in my inbox, most of the time I recognize the person's name or the person's email that's bought from me
That's
because like
awesome.
we've talked on Twitter or we've talked or they've been on my mailing list, something like that. And like I get to know people because that in turn helps me as a business owner because if I'm talking to my audience and I like them and they like me, then they're going to share and I can figure out what's important to them, how to change things to make it more important, how to build different things that they will value. And it just builds like a good relationship and it builds like even from the pragmatic side, it builds a business that's super profitable and has very low margins because I just spend time on relationships and trust. And I mean, to me, that makes so much sense as a business owner. But to so many other people, they're like, churn and burn, bro. Like, this is the way, like, I'm going to have all of the pop ups and all of the like tricks and all of the hacks that will be employed. And it's like, I just don't think I don't know how that is so hard to sustain, I think, and would require so much work and stress and responsibility to sustain. Just seems easier to
Totally.
do it the other way.
Yeah, and you touched on so much there. I think to talk a little bit more about like how I got connected with some of your stuff and started putting more of these pieces together and got to the point where I am now with feeling like this is so much more of the correct way and truthful way and better way of living and creating a business was like I had started out freelancing and was kind of like making enough money to survive and was doing a lot of stuff on my own, but like realized like, okay, I'm not really making enough money doing this to really be able to like set aside savings. And like, I'm constantly worried about the next client and like, that's just not cool. I can't keep doing this. And so I'd started working for another buddy and we had built up this other hat company between a couple of our other friends. And, it was just pretty clear that like I think just based on the things that were being put out online and in a lot of the different media outlets was just like the way that you do this is you hop onto Facebook and you start trying to figure out the exact type of person that's going to buy once and you just pump money into it and pump money into it and go for it. And I think, there was something about doing that or at least the way that the business was being run. So I didn't really fully understand that side of it going into it or while it was all happening around me because there was so much going on. But there were pieces of it where I was like, this isn't where I really want to be. And there's got to be something else. So I got out of it and kind of started looking back into it and was able to dive into some analytics and like really prove what was happening and that the money was coming from Facebook and that these people weren't ever even coming back to buy, let alone coming back to the site, period. And it's like, if you do the math on that, it's just astronomical how much money you spend on it and how much you end up not only competing with other people for those same customers, but on the same platform. And then all of a sudden you're at the mercy of Facebook. And if they want to change something or, boot you off or literally whatever they want to do, you're screwed. Not to mention, you're supplying them with all the money they need to do whatever the fuck they want, in so many other facets, which is a completely different conversation. And what I thought was cool was like with the project that I'm working on now, one of the big things to me was like I've always wanted to figure out how to scale better, or not necessarily scale, but grow in a more sustainable way and in a way that felt better to me as a person. And it kept popping up in like whenever I was trying to update the website or work on a product mix or whatever else was going on, it kept coming up and I was like, I have no answer to this, and this is like something that I really want to figure out. And what was awesome was going through your book, it was like the answer was right there. You were just like, you focus on customer service and about building trust and about being a human, and everything else just extends from that, where word of mouth starts picking up. They're selling to other people. They're coming back. You're getting repeat buyers. And you can literally spend absolutely no money or way less money on customer acquisition. And literally everything is better because of it. And I was like, fuck, that is like, if there's any one thing that I got out of this book, I think that was like personally my golden nugget, because it was something that I was struggling with for so long, because I 100% did not want to stick money into Facebook or Google based on a lot of the things I've been seeing online lately.
Yeah, and I mean, word of mouth is such a like even with today's technology and acquisition channels, like word of mouth is still the most powerful because it's trust by proxy. If you're looking for like headphones and you just go to a store and you're like, "Oh, this one might look good." But if I'm like, "Dude, these are the best headphones to buy." If you trust me, then you're going to trust that recommendation. And that applies to so many things. And I think if we focus on yeah, making the quality things, if we focus on the customers, like we'll build sale like organic sales channels from that instead of putting all of our time and money and effort into paid acquisition channels on platforms that are garbage, like
Mhm.
ethically and for every other reason are garbage, then I think we can yeah, we can build more sustainable things. It's funny, like even like looking it seems like all of this is so counterintuitive, but like it's backed up by the numbers, like it's backed up by data, it's backed up by the businesses that end up lasting are the ones that grow the slowest because they're figuring out how to be profitable now versus profitable in the future, which is an issue for a lot of tech companies especially, but they're also focused on making their customers happy now as opposed to just like who care their customers now, forget them. We need to find more because they're going to churn out or they're only going to be one-time buyers. So let's just go find the next crop plus 20 to 30% to offset the refund churn.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's ridiculous. I had seen or read an article maybe a couple weeks ago at this point by Steve Blank, who was talking about how in the tech world, like the lean startup method is kind of dead, and what these people are increasingly going after is like, instead of trying to do a series of funding or kind of bootstrap to get to a point where they can become profitable for less money, they're essentially just throwing as much money at the initial problem as humanly possible to get this huge reach so that people see it everywhere and assume that like this reach, this like constant inundation from this one source means that they must be high quality, they must be doing something good, and like that means that I'm going to go after them. And their whole goal is to kind of push the competitors out and just hit you over the head so much that you finally just give in. And it's like, man, when I was reading that article, I was like, there is so much wrong with this, and that is
Yeah.
so shitty. And to think that the other side of this message that you're trying to get out more isn't even really a part of the conversation right now, and how much of a bummer that is, because when people are only seeing that one side of it, it's it's awful, because it's like for someone, back to that statistic that I was talking about with my generation having the least amount of entrepreneurs in 25 years, it's like if you're seeing that and you're seeing like you have to have this amount of money just to even enter the game,
Yeah.
you're done. You're not even going to get into it.
Yeah, it's tough. It's so like yeah, there's so much that's just fake. Even there's an article in the Atlantic today that was talking about influencers promoting products that weren't sponsoring them just so it would increase their credibility. Like I don't even have any like I'm sponsored by I don't even have an Instagram account anymore, but like I'm sponsored by Apple and this is my sponsored and people would be like, "Oh, well if he's sponsored by Apple, maybe like our business should put money into sponsoring his influencer account." And it's just like that's only going to work for such a short amount of time. Like, it's so short-sighted to do that because you can only pull the wool over people's eyes for a very small amount of time unless you have something that backs up, like, a reason for them to buy or stick around or be happy with what they purchased. Like, it's only going to work one time at most. Whereas I think to build a smart business or a business that lasts, like, it needs to work almost all of the time, like, repetitively, and I just think, like, even huge companies, like, I think the one of my favorite stats from the book is that the average life of an S&P 500 company is 15 years.
Mhm.
Like, the biggest companies in the world on this, like, index only last 15 years, and I'm like, shit, my business is 20 years old. Like, I feel pretty good. Like, it's made
Sure.
not even close to the revenue that any of these businesses have made, or even like their CEOs have made. But like, I'm still going. Like, I'm still profitable. Like, I still make enough to like have a great life. And like that's good for me. And like that works for me. And that works for a lot of other people too. Where it's like it's also a lot, it feels like such a weight off your shoulders if you don't have to be the biggest or make the most money. Like that seems like there's such an amount of stress or responsibility involved, instead of like just being like, okay, I just need to make like enough, or I need to be like enough to be comfortable. Then it's a lot easier to get to that point than, like, I need to be like the next Elon Musk kinda thing. Like, that would be so stressful to do that. You'd have to work so many jobs and have so many rockets for that to happen.
Totally. And that brings me to another piece of this whole thing, which was, I don't think it was ever like specifically mentioned by you in the book, but it was kind of hinted at a couple times, which is just like it's better to just keep kind of making like constant revisions to things than to try and take these like huge steps and feel like you're putting something together and it's perfect, and then you're all of a sudden you're done and it's working. It's like it never works like that. And I think that's the other part of the media landscape now that I really dislike, is like they love to latch onto these stories of these people who like made it overnight or whatever. And a lot of times, you know, there's no real backbone to those people's stories. And so you end up with these kind of micro celebrities that end up in these really shitty spaces and are like psychologically super fucked up because they got thrust into this position that they weren't even close to being ready for. And yeah, it's absolutely nuts, and it's not how anyone in the real world gets things done. It's like you take small steps and you keep working and you take things as they come and you just keep trucking.
Yeah, exactly. Like, launches are never singular events. Like, you launch something, you learn, and then you launch it again, and then you learn, and then you launch it again. Like, there's so much pressure put on, like, oh, it needs to be like the top of product hunt on like first go, or it needs to be like a six-figure launch and stuff. Like, I've never had a six-figure launch, but I've had for like launch one, but I've had some that have been there like after I've launched it and not done that for like 8 times in a row. And then I've learned, and then I figured stuff out, and then I've been able to like learn enough from my audience and from people that are paying attention, like, okay, this is maybe how it should work, or this is what you need, so I'll build this into it, and then I'll launch it again, and then I'll learn, and then I'll iterate, and then I'll do it again. Like, it's such a long game, and it's never done either. Like, all of the products that I sell are constantly being updated and tweaked and fixed and added to and subtracted from. But that's the fun of it. Like, I like doing that. I like making things that get better and better, that aren't just like stagnant.
Yeah, and it was cool to see that little tidbit that you had put in there about WD-40 being like the 39 things that didn't work and then the 40th one that did. I think that's beyond awesome if that's a true story.
Yeah, I hope that is a true story. So I was like, this is too good. And it was in like 5 or 6 publications, and I couldn't find the like person at WD-40 that did it. And I'm just like, yeah, this is too, even if it's not, it's a parable and it's perfect for
Yeah.
like how long it takes to make stuff. Even the post-it notes. That was supposed to be adhesive for the aerospace industry, and it just didn't work. Like, it's obviously not strong enough to fucking hold a plane together or a spaceship together, but it's good to like have something that you can put on something and take off, and it doesn't leave sticky stuff. So like sometimes there's unintended like consequences, or unintended like awesome things that can happen. Even like Gore-Tex and the Gore-Tex people who invented the Elixir guitar strings, which don't rust, and they stay really bright for so long. Like, they weren't trying to make guitar a coating for guitar strings, but then they tried it on that after working at a whole bunch of different things for so long, and now they came up with something that's like the best guitar string, especially when you live in the Pacific Northwest and everything is very humid all the time.
That's another piece of the book that I really enjoyed too, is when you kind of started going into like these not necessarily the full stories, but like instances where people decided like this wasn't necessarily the thing that was going to work, so I walked away from it. And that, you know, the typical idea of failure isn't necessarily failure. It's just it's figuring out that that isn't the way that's going to work, and you put it aside and move forward with other ideas, because it's just, yeah, I think that whole thing with surrounding what failure is and all of that is just so skewed.
Yeah, it's just unsuccessful experiments. Like everything in life is an experiment. Everything in business is an experiment. So it's like if an experiment fails, you didn't fail. You just disproved a hypothesis you had. And that means you just try again with a different hypothesis. And that's just the way the world works. Like nobody, like there's no absolutes in business. Nobody has like a crystal ball to see like like this is exactly how something is going to 100% work. And that's what we were talking about with launches. It's like you need to launch something to see if it's going to work or not. Like you can stack
But
the
the
deck in
growth
your favor.
hackers and the gurus do.
Yes, exactly. But they only do that. It's so funny that there are so many industries now that only exist as profitable businesses by teaching. Like, I don't think there's that many successful growth hackers that do growth hacking for companies, but there's a lot of successful growth hackers that teach other people how to be growth hackers. And that's how they make money. They don't make money doing using their skill. They make
Hmm.
money teaching other people how to do that. It's just like the drop shipping industry. Like there's almost no drop shippers that make a ton of money, but there's a ton of drop shippers that make money teaching you how to be a drop shipper just like them. And it's just
Hmm.
like it's just like ludicrous that these industries exist that only exist as profitable businesses because they're teaching people how to do something that isn't profitable, and then that person will be forced just to teach other people. It's like a pyramid scheme.
Yeah,
Like really,
totally.
that's it's like multi-level marketing shit.
But it's, I think the reason why it exists so much and why it continues to keep going is that it takes diving a significant amount into the business world, and like a real kind of like thirst for trying to understand what's going on behind the scenes to really get to the fact that that's what's happening with a lot of those things. And I think that was one of the reasons why I another reason why I was so attracted to your book was because it talks about those things, and it's just like, you know, there's, or talks about how there's more going on behind like how a business is built and how you can run things successfully than just what someone's seeing on the surface. And throughout the book and throughout kind of my experience with a lot of these different industries has always been like, what is someone who has never set foot in the marketing world or design world or anything think of these things? Like it must just be so awful. And maybe it's not because they're kind of blind to what's happening, but like, how do you see what these companies are putting out, and what does it feel like to be on the other side and not be able to see behind that veil and know like the amount of shit that they're not telling you about behind the scenes?
Yeah, I mean, it's always transparency is also, I think, a double-edged sword that leads to envy. Where when people are transparent with like even with like income, like when people are transparent with income, I think that's good because that definitely cuts into like different pay for different genders or different races. So like being open about salary, it means that like if you're getting paid different than somebody else just because your skin is different or your sex is different, then that's probably a good thing to be open about that. But it can also lead to like, oh, I'm not making as much as this person that's at a different job even. So it's a double-edged sword, but I do think that ultimately like transparency is a good thing for those things. And it's just I don't know. I think that businesses and people, like their intentions shine through whether they want them to or not. So like if somebody is just in it to like make a quick buck or to like churn and burn, then like I think people ultimately see that. I mean, they could get swayed or like wrapped up in the hype of it. And like who wouldn't want to like 10x their business with like one hack a day or something like that? Like it seems like that's a good idea, but like there's just a nuance to wisdom and experience that doesn't come through. Like I could do all of the things that a growth hacker says, like in a list of 10 things on a single page, but like I need to know what those things are gonna do, how they're gonna affect all the different parts of my business, how they're gonna affect my customers, and it's like, it's hard to sum that up in just, like, a Medium post. Like, it's just really
Completely.
hard to do that, and I think there's a nuance to experience that you can probably learn from others, but I think it's more beneficial to learn by doing it and to see, like, what you like and what you don't like in business and life, in anything. So there's I can't remember the guy's name, but he's a writer for The Guardian. He's like, "Knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit, and wisdom is knowing you don't put a tomato on a fruit salad." It's like, there's a nuance there that, like, experience will hopefully show you.
Yeah, completely. That's actually one of the quotes that I pulled out and written down because I liked it so much.
Such a
But
good quote because it's so like, it's such a ridiculous quote, but it's, like, actually really logical as well, which is my favorite.
yeah, totally. So going back into this, like what pieces of this were kind of the individual pieces that you really pull out as being most true to you, and what was it like diving into writing this whole thing? Were there nuggets that you had started to pull out as you got into it that you hadn't really seen before or heard too much about? Like what else happened as you got further into writing this and talking with more people?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it was that it was cool to see other people doing things that worked for them, which were so unique to them, where, like, if their version of success was, like, put on a billboard or, like, put in a magazine, like, everybody else would be like, "What?" But for them, it's absolutely perfect, like, it's just the most perfect thing, like, I think the book starts with, a story about this guy named Tom Fishburne who runs a business called Marketoon, and, like, he went to Harvard, got an MBA, was, like, a C-level executive at, like, a food company in the States, and, like, now he sits in, like, this workshop in his backyard in Northern California and draws all day with his 2 little daughters sitting on the floor drawing with their dad. And he's like, that is 100% success, and also he makes more money than he did before because he runs a pretty smart company and is small enough that he can kind of pivot, and he runs the business with his wife does all the operations for it. So it's like a family affair. I don't think his little kids' drawings make it into client work, but they're still there drawing. So I don't know, to me, man, it was like just seeing, like, all the different versions of what people can do with their business to make them happy and make things sustainable was just like, I never would have thought of this. Like, I never would have thought about it this way because, like, this doesn't work. This wouldn't work for me, but I see how it could work for other people, and I see that there's more to it than just like, here's the list of what successful people do. It's just like there really isn't one.
Mhm.
And that, like, it just kept reinforcing that over and over again, how unique and similar in some ways everybody is, and how we all want kind of the same things, but we all achieve them or get to that or find the path to them in totally different ways, and that's awesome, and that's what makes things interesting. That's what makes writers like me happy because I have all of these stories that I can tell, and it's not the same story every time. It's a different story every single time.
Yeah, and I think to kind of back up too with what you were talking about before and tie it in with this, it's also the reason why I love more long form content so much is because you can pull out all these nuances and understandings and ask questions and dive deeper than you could if you were just clicking on something and trying to be sold some shit or like reading into a clickbait article and then clicking off of it. It's like, getting on podcasts and reading books and connecting with more real stories of people that are doing things differently, um, but because it works for them is incredible.
Yeah, it's just I mean, that's a good thing about a book. Like, I don't need to sell anybody on the book. If they're reading it, they bought it already. I can just focus on the story.
Totally.
Yeah.
So what else is surrounding the book now? You have like you were talking about having a lot of kind of like yeah, just tell me more about that whole process because I've never been anywhere close to something like that.
Yeah, so it's funny because like there's so many so I finished writing the book a year and a half ago, which I was like, this is so much, like I have no patience. This is so much time to wait. And then as I'm getting into it, I'm like, oh, there's so many pieces. Like this is so, and now I'm like, oh, I don't even know if a year and a half was enough time to go from like finished manuscript to release, because like I had to go into the recording studio to do the audiobooks. I narrate the North American version of the book. Somebody else narrates the other version, which doesn't even make sense to me because like I already narrated it. So just use it. Any English country that can understand the way that I talk should just get me. But it's different for every territory. Like I have a publisher in the States and a different publisher in the UK. And they like the book cover is different depending on where you live in the world, even
Huh.
though it's both English. And just like just things like that are just like really interesting that I had like no idea. And even the people sell the rights to the audiobook sometimes separate from the physical book. And like there I think there was like 8 or 9 companies that bid on the audiobook rights,
Whoa.
and then Audible ended up buying it, but they buy it from my publisher, and that money just goes against my advance. It's not like I don't even like I technically get the money, but I don't really get the money in my bank account because it's all just counting against that. And there's like also a lot of things that are kind of similar to self-publishing too, because like I'm doing a lot of publicity and promotion right now, and not that's exactly the same as if I was self-publishing it, where it's like I need to get word out about this. So I made like a podcast for Company of One. I've got a course that releases on the same day as the book. I'm doing probably 100 interviews to like talk about the book with various people. I'm writing articles for everyone from like there's an article that I wrote that's going in the inserts in British Airways flights in January, I think, and like writing for business publications. So like there's so many different things that I'm working on that's just trying to like get word out that like, hey, there's a different narrative happening. And if you don't like the one that's currently out there around business, maybe this one will fit. Maybe it won't, but maybe it will. And that would be cool if it does. And if, like I said in the very beginning, like if this helps show people that there's more than one way to do things, then I think we'll have just a much more interesting and diverse set of entrepreneurs that are like joining us and making cool shit. And that to me would be like the ultimate goal of this.
That's awesome. On a funnier note, is it weird knowing that you're going to be whispering into a bunch of people's ears in a very like less personal way with that audiobook?
Slightly, but like I don't know. I do so much podcasting that it feels kind of similar, other than I was like actually at a recording studio, like a band studio recording. And it's funny, even like I was my wife and I were out with this woman and her boyfriend probably last year. And like I met her through either Twitter or something online, and she listened to a show that I had with my buddy Jason, Invisible Office Hours, and her boyfriend had listened to like a whole season of that show driving somewhere. And then them and my wife and I were driving somewhere, and we were in their car, and I was sitting in the back seat with my wife talking to them, and she was just like, "This is so weird because like, I've listened to you in my car for, like, a week straight on a road trip, and now I can hear you in the car, except you're actually sitting in the car, and this is just such a weird thing." I'm like, this is our life now."
Yeah, strange.
So, yeah,
Strange
it's
but
just so
cool.
strange, but interesting.
That's awesome. So what was it like, kind of trying to get ahead of all of putting all of these moving pieces together as it was all starting to group into this moving thing as you were working on all of it? Because obviously, like I mean, maybe to me it feels like you're ahead of the curve. I'm sure for you it probably doesn't. It's like, oh, it's crunch time. The book's going to be launching
Yes.
soon. But
Yeah.
obviously, there's a lot of work that has to go into making sure that all these pieces are put in place to keep pushing things along.
Yeah, I mean, it's a team effort. It's funny, and I talk about and I remember that. I talk about that in the acknowledgments that every book is like a group effort that the author gets to take credit for. And I mean, like, I have a publicist that's helping with bookings. I have somebody that's helping me with like scheduling. My agent's doing a whole bunch of stuff from selling foreign rights to like also getting press. I have publisher in the States and a publisher in the UK working on things, and that I'm going back and forth with. I have a copy editor that's helping me. I have a podcast audio engineer that helps with the show. I have partners on all my other projects that are pulling more than their weight right now. So it's like a collaborative effort to get this thing out the door. And even like a lot of my friends are helping me, and authors that have been where I'm at but are slightly further ahead, that are like that I'm picking their brains all the time. I have two of my friends who are published authors over on, I think it was Monday, and we just had like a full day of like book business chat to kind of see like what each other was working on and how things were working. And then how, because I have, my book comes out before either of their next books, so we were talking a lot about like what, like how can I make this launch work based on what they knew in their experiences. So yeah, it's like a community, it's like a community effort to get this bad boy out the door.
Yeah, that's
So
amazing. That situation, I feel like you would need a, a book sweater and a pipe and like some nice reading glasses to sit down and, and talk to people about your experiences around publishing. But that's, yeah, that's incredible. That's super cool.
yeah.
Um, yeah, what a wild ride. So what has it been like for you to go from kind of trying to push more toward like, I think what it seems like you had started off more of with Company of One, and that you're the one in charge of a lot of these moving parts, and it's all kind of coming through you, to having to kind of like let go of the reins a little bit and trust that a lot of these other people are now on board and that it's this bigger thing. Um, when it seemed like before you had kind of pushed it more toward like, how do I automate more things and how do I kind of like not necessarily back away from it as much, but just simplify it more.
Yeah, I mean, I still try to keep it as simple as possible because I don't think I'm smart enough for it not to be simple. But I also think that if I'm going to be working with other people, there has to be some things in place. Like they have to not require management because I suck at managing other people. I'm just not good at that, so I can't do that. They also need to be like experts at the thing that they do so they can just take it and run with it. Like I don't need to teach my agent how to be an agent. She's been an agent forever. She understands that better than anybody else. And same with my editor for at the publisher. Like he's been an editor for probably as long as I've been alive. He's getting kind of old. But like it's just but it is also like giving up control because like I didn't get to design the cover of either cover for my book. And that's a first for me where I've released something that I didn't design, which was tough, especially since the cover's all right. It's not my favorite, but like I didn't that's not my call to
It
it's
meets a
not my call
rat.
to make. Exactly. I don't understand why there's fish on it, to be honest, but it would have been better with rats. But still, like I trust that my publisher knows what a book cover needs to look like in order for people, the right people, to get interested in it. So I'm just like, you know that this isn't my favorite cover, but let's see. Like you're also the expert at this, and I'm not. So I'll lean on your opinion on it. It's not offensive to me, so I'll lean into your expertise and let's see how this works. So yeah, just stuff like that has just been interesting because I'm not used to it, but I'm getting used to it, at least for this at least for this project.
You kind of have to get used to it. It's not really
Yeah.
an option at this point.
Yeah, exactly.
So what other things, like other than what you had touched on in the book, have you learned going through this whole process? Because it seems like there, like I had just mentioned, and what you were talking about was there's so many moving parts now, and there's so many people that you have to trust with so many things. Like, was there any kind of overarching thing that you've come to understand through this, or is it just kind of more of the same thing that you were doing before and just slightly different pieces of that same thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of a bit of both where and I mean, it kind of touches on the kind of thinking through the book where growth makes sense sometimes if it aligns with the purpose and it aligns with logic. And I mean, for this, I needed to grow my team for the book launch, but like I don't need those people to be part of my business. They're just part of this project that we're all working on together. And so, like, I still don't wanna have a big business, but, like, if a project needs, like, an agent and a publicist and a publisher and all of that, then that's what the project needs, and I'm happy to grow to that to make that happen. But for the next project, maybe it just needs me, or maybe it just needs me and one other person. So, yeah, it's just a matter of finding, like, what that organic, like, best size is or best fit is for, like, who needs to be involved in it, because sometimes it's more than just you. Like, it's hard to run a business entirely on your own. Like, it's hard to be good enough at all of the things needed to, like, to do that. Like, even for any part of my business, like, I have a lawyer and an accountant because I don't know how to do those things. I don't even wanna get good at those
Yeah,
things.
no kidding.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's just been more of, like, finding, like, what the best size and what the best fit is for each thing, and for this, it required a bit more. The next thing is not going to, so
How do you put together the, and it seems like it's not necessarily a process, but more of an awareness of understanding like where you're at within each of those processes? Because it seems like within my own career, it's been like colliding into a wall and then being like, that's not it, coming back, colliding into the other wall, and then being like, bam, 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 bam.
yep.
And like kind of like figuring out where the middle ground is by hitting something that you're not into. Like, is it still like that for you, or
Yeah, it's still
do you?
exactly that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that exactly, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
because
didn't know if there was.
I don't know if something is going to work or if I'm gonna like it unless I try it, and then I'm like, "Nope." Like, "Next."
Because I think that's the most difficult part about putting this entire book into perspective and using it for in someone's own circumstances is like, I understand what you're saying, but how do I put that into practice? And it's kind of like taking a step, reassessing the situation, taking another step, doing it again, and really understanding like looking at it against your own values and understanding, is this where I want to be right now? Yes or no. Also understanding that then with the next step you might take, that the same answer to the same question might not be the same.
Yeah, everything changes, man, like, all the time, so that's kinda, yeah, it's just a matter of checking in and being self-aware about that kinda stuff, which is hard to do for sure, but I also think it's absolutely and completely necessary to check in. Like, it's hard to just work in your business, like, it's also, yeah, it can lead to places you don't wanna end up, where I think we need to work, like, on our business, not just in our business, and be like, "Is this the business that I wanna be running? Is this a team that I wanna have? Is this a growth that makes sense to me? Are these the customers I wanna be dealing with?" So, yeah, it just requires that constant check-in, and like you said, yeah, things change all the time, so we need to keep checking in all the time as well.
Yeah. And I think that that brings me to another question too that I had, which was like, do you have any sort of um, measurable indicators that you use to understand whether or not your different businesses are kind of where you want them to be, or knowing like where to rein it in and kind of change things? Or is it more just constantly asking yourself a set of questions and going about it that way?
Yeah, I mean, some of it is just like, if this project isn't as profitable as other ones, then maybe I kill it off, or more than likely, is this project requiring all of my time in terms of maintenance and support? Or is this a project that people aren't really finding as much value in as they find in other projects? So it's definitely a bunch of questions, but it does require checking in. Like, for most of the products that I have, I probably check in twice a year to see, like, if they're working, if they're continuing to work, and all those things that I mentioned. Yeah.
Cool. So it's kind
Yeah.
of like 80/20 ish principle, but
Yeah.
mixed with like checking in every so often to see
Yeah.
where they're at.
Exactly. Like, if the work that I'm doing is getting me the results without having to do, like, that last 20% always takes, like, a gazillion times longer than you think it will, and if it does require, like, that much, like, I don't wanna have a business where I just have to work on one thing. So
Mhm.
if any one part of my business or any one product in my business was requiring all my time for, like, forever, I'd be like, "I just don't
No.
wanna do this," because like I love writing books and like I'll spend 3 to 4 months like just heads down writing a book. But like after I've done that, I don't want to write a book in month 5. I want to work on something else for like a
Yeah.
year and then go back to writing.
I'm the same way with projects, but also with food. I'll like dive all in on like tacos for
Yeah.
like 2 weeks, and then it's like, all right, now we're on to Thai food. Now we're on to burgers, or like I don't know, whatever the flavor of the day is.
Yeah, exactly.
Keeps things fresh.
Yeah.
So then the only other question that I had was, what other sorts of difficulties or downsides do you see to the company of one mindset versus like this kind of like fast growth kind of deal, like the other side? Because I think you do a great job of showing the positive sides of it, but I think there are always going to be the opposite sides. And to your point, or to the point that you make in the book, it's not for everybody. Working for yourself is not going to work for
Mhm.
everyone. So what are some things that might prove, to reframe it, might prove to be difficult for certain people in trying to adopt what you're laying out here?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that's probably the biggest thing that you mentioned is like if you want to work for yourself, you have to be okay with doing all of the business side of things as well as the job that you're getting paid to do. Like you need if you're a freelance designer, you have to be a freelance designer and a business owner. If you're selling like a SaaS product, you have to be a SaaS product creator and a business owner. Like you have to be both of those things. And I think a lot of times we think like, oh, I can just do that. Like it'll take like an hour a week or something to do the business stuff. And it's usually like half. It's usually like half your time is spent doing the business stuff and half your time is spent doing the creative stuff or the making stuff. And if that's not okay, that's fine. Like that's if you want to spend 100% of your time doing the creative stuff or doing the work you're getting paid to do, there's ways to do that that aren't working for yourself and that's there's no problem with that. I think a lot of times people like in the entrepreneurial space say like, "Oh, well, you need to be an entrepreneur. You're not like living your fullest life, or like you're just a sheeple if you work for a company." And it's like that's not true. It's like everybody needs to find what works best for them. And I mean, I know some people, especially designers, who are like they should be working for a business because that suits them so well to do those things. And I think the other thing is that there's definitely like working for yourself. There's definitely like that, like, I don't even know how to say it, but, like, not really loneliness, but I guess kind of loneliness, but, like, that camaraderie or, like, water cooler or, like, just the ability to use, like, a team or use other people as motivation. Like, if we're working together and you're relying on me for a piece so you can build your piece, then I'm gonna be so motivated to do it because I don't wanna let you down. I don't wanna let the team down, don't let the company down. But when we're working for yourself, it's like that's just me. Like, I guess I'll put it off. And it's like, it's hard to stay motivated. And I think we need to be like honest with ourselves and be like, can I be motivated just by self? Because if not, it's really hard. Like, it'd be really hard to do this. If that's the case, if it's hard to be motivated like that way, or if you basically like, I think a lot of people just need to think about like how they want to spend their day. Like, I think it's as easy as that. Like, I think basically every business is a lifestyle business. If you work for a company, like a normal job, then your life is that you're there 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and like you have your life evenings and weekends. If you work for a high growth company or Elon Musk, for some reason, we're really bagging on Elon today. Like, don't think he minds. But like that, if you're that, then you don't have any free time. You don't have any life because you're fully consumed by work. But I think if you work for yourself, then you should you should work into the work you want to do based on the life you want to have, instead of here's the work that I'm doing. This is the life that I'm left with. Like, I think working for yourself is hard. I think that's the benefit. And if you can't figure that benefit out, or if it's not worth it, then it might not be worth it to do it. Where, like, I know that I don't want to have any project or product that requires urgency. Like, if something is broken, I definitely want to fix it, but I don't want to like wake up at 3 in the morning to fix it. Or I know that, like, for me, I don't really like traveling for work anymore because I did that for too long. So, like, I don't want to have a job that requires me to, like, be in an airport a couple times a week or flying for work. I'd rather just do road trips for fun. And so I think if we figure out, like, what's the life we're working towards, and how we can make business decisions that kind of align with that, I think then then the challenges become worth it. Because otherwise, I don't even know if it is worth it if we're not working towards that. If we're just working towards some imaginary, like, this is what success is, so this is what I'm gonna go towards.
Yeah. So then to flip that, let's say someone's listening to this and they resonate with a lot of what you're talking about, but they get to a point where they're like, I really don't think the working for myself thing is what I want. What are some kind of actionable things you could take from this to utilize a portion of the company of one mindset in more of a 9 to 5 environment?
Yeah, I think that, a lot of this mindset can apply to that, where if you do it right, you can get kind of the benefits of it without having to, like, be on your own. And I think there's definitely a lot of businesses, bigger businesses, who are seeing, like, benefits, financial and to them, in having a workforce that's more autonomous, where they can, like, maybe have flex hours or work from home days. And I mean, I think, like, even through the data that I present in the book, it, like, if people feel more ownership of a project, they're probably going to do a better job. And so maybe they don't have to have their butts in a chair from 9 to 5 Monday to Friday. Maybe they can, like, work a bit at night, if that, as long as they meet their deadlines, then it can fly. And I mean, I don't think any boss would be like, "Yeah, like, just flip a switch, like, let's just do that." But maybe it's like, "Why don't I try working from home, like, half a day a week? And I'll show you that I'm getting my work done, I'll show you that I can be focused." Or maybe it's like, yeah, that is more but, like, you add it in little increments, or you ask for things in little increments. And then I think, like, if you show somebody or you show a team that the more autonomy that they give you, the more ownership you have of a project, and the better work that you'll do, and the more focused you can become. Because I mean, how hard would it be to work in an office where there's all these distractions? So I think, if you just kind of iterate on that, then I think you can kind of come to, like, a company of one model within a big company. And even through the book, there's definitely examples of that. Like, in Google, they give their employees 20% time to work on whatever they want. A lot of businesses let you work from home in some of the jobs. A lot of businesses let you have flex time where you don't have to work set hours. You just have to get the work done at a set deadline. So yeah, I think a lot of that can apply if you, like, take it in an iterative approach.
Awesome. Is there anything else you'd like to say to wrap up, and where can people go to check out the book once it's live?
Yeah, I mean, the book comes out Jan 15, 2019, Company of One. It's on I made a website for it because I make websites for everything, ofone.co, and there's a bunch of other goodies on that site too. But yeah, I mean, the good thing about traditional publishing is it should be in your local bookstore. And if it's not, you can ask them and they can get it, which is cool.
And they can now find, or will be able to find, the audiobook and
Yeah,
listen to the sweet sounds of your voice whenever they feel
exactly. Yeah.
like it.
I'll whisper in your ears.
I mean, if I were you, I would add some like weird little nuggets in there of like some like, I don't know, funny stuff where you're like whispering behind what you're actually saying.
Oh, man, they're such sticklers for the script. Like,
That
I
makes
even
sense.
went off script with, like, just descriptor words that don't even matter, and they're like, "You gotta go redo
No.
that." Like, "No, it's what you wrote." And I'm like, "But I wrote it. I can change it a little bit." They're like, "Nope."
You got to pitch them on changing your accent to like a UK accent so you can do this too.
That would be so hard. Johnny Depp did that because he read part of, not Mick Jagger, the guitar player. Can't remember his name. The Rolling Stones guy that isn't Mick
Okay.
Jagger. Anyways, he
Drawing a
read
blank.
yeah, me too. He read, and people listening are like, "Oh, it's this guy. How can you not remember that?" It's the guy that the character Jack Sparrow is based off of. But he read it in a British accent because the guy's British for like half the book. And like you can hear him get up and like go and open like a bottle of wine and like pour wine in a glass. I'm like, if I was Johnny Depp, I could get away with that, but I am not Johnny Depp.
Dude, that's a whole new tangent. Have you seen him lately?
No. I know he
Man,
has some issues with money
you
from
should,
buying all of the wine.
dude, look at some pictures later, but yeah, we'll just leave that where it is. Well, awesome, man. I appreciate it. We'll have to do this again after you go through the whole tour of everything and
Yeah.
run the gamut and things calm down a little bit.
Sounds good, man. This is great. Thank you.
Yeah, right back at you. Have a great, great holiday season, and I'll catch you on the other side.
All right. Sounds good, man. Take care.
You too. Peace.
Cheers.